Part 4. Falling Out. 188 Post-Treaty. It was 6 years before Horth returned to Black Hearth. He exchanged messages with his parents via Branst, and in that way heard news of the birth of his new brother, Eller, and kept abreast of Mother's subsequent pregnancies. Brillet had a baby she named Dorn. When Dorn was 8 months old, she took him to a genotype ceremony on Tark. Horth was not invited to attend, but he was thoroughly pleased when she informed him that he was the sire. He got Branst to help him write an announcement for their parents, declaring that he had a freedom price. Zrenel had survived the Eagle Nest debacle. When Dorn was 1, Zrenel married April on San Home. The Kimstan urged Hanks to disown his eldest son, severing him from the right of challenge for the title of Liege Sal. Hanks refused. Father was challenged twice, and Brillet put down another challenger. Branst claimed that most Kimstan were fed up with Nessak encroachments on Black Hearth. But Brillet told Horth a growing minority was getting used to trade with Nessaks. Horth was not surprised to learn his father won his duels with the Kimstan. He expected Hanks to win duels. Mother doesn't always watch anymore, Branst told his exiled brother. She stays up in the nursery with Zersarn and little Eller. The runt says he sees it through with her to add his prayers to the watching dead, but the truth is Eller's squeamish and spoiled rotten, Branst added with a grunt. Can you imagine, you or me or Zrenel getting away with avoiding a title duel? Eventually, the uproar over Zrenel's marriage ended. Horth set his heart on becoming a battle wheel captain, like Sinka. To do that, he first had to fly as a Rel Shah, and then as an Avshah, a hand leader. A Rel Shah's work in killing Reach was dangerous. Persistent threats to navigation lingered, purposefully caused by Rishans and their efforts 200 years ago to stop a Sevolite invasion. They had polluted space lanes with clouds of dust, set loose deadly viruses, destroyed habitats, and generally done every Okalani thing imaginable, with no care for future generations. Struggling to set right some small piece of the fallout, Horth was inclined to believe that only soulless beings who cared nothing about rebirth could have been so irresponsible. After 3 years, Horth achieved the rank of Avshah. He met people he had never imagined existed, and he soul-touched criminals he wished he had never experienced. But in the cockpit, he was always able to wield his anger like a sword. He saw enough during the years in Killing Reach to harden his early belief in sword law to a diamond-hard conviction. Killing Reach offered more opportunities for studies of that nature than anywhere else in Seveldom. Horth worked with engineering crews to clean up shattered stations that were strewn about with flotsam that included bodies. He evacuated starving stationers, cut off from the flow of trade by their leader's treacherous reputation, who got so desperate that they ate their own children. And he witnessed the hideous outcomes of struggles that stupidly destroyed the very habitat they fought over. War in space destroyed the very means of man's survival in a wasteland cold enough to numb the greatest speed, and huge enough to force perspective on the mightiest of egos. Pilots flew 2 days on and 5 off, leaving Horth time for station-side pursuits. He spent most of that time working as a voluntary apprentice with an engineering detail, or working on ships in dock. He felt he ought to know as much as possible about battle wheels if he was going to command one. But though he made a place for himself in Killing Reach, his heart remained on Fountain Court, and he looked forward to Brant's visits. Horth was in the officer's gym giving his son a fencing lesson. Little Dorn brought up his shortened sword belatedly. Horth poked him in the chest, and the child staggered. Horth took a step back to wait for the 4-year-old to overcome his tears. It surprised him that Dorn cried. He had expected any child of his and Brillet's to be too relish for that. Dorn quickly mastered the hurt and repeated the failed move, to practice it. Then he nodded to let Horth know he was ready again. Horth repeated the attack, instructively, and this time Dorn parried. Horth rewarded him with a swift smile, and Dorn beamed with pleasure. "Horth, Brant's voice hailed him from above. Horth looked up to see Brant standing on the deck of the observation gallery ringing the gym floor. "I'm coming down," Brant said, and disappeared. 4-year-old Dorn managed to keep quiet only until Brant burst onto the gym floor. "I've got a new sister, Brant," Dorn announced. "Really?" Brant exclaimed with satisfying pleasure. "Has Liege Brillet been generous to the waiting dead again so soon?" He slapped Horth on the back. "You must be quite an inspiration, brother." "No, Brant," cried Dorn. "Not a full sister, a regular half-sister, on my sire's side by Captain Sinka." Brant raised both eyebrows. "Sinka, no less." He praised his brother. "Isn't she the one who welcomed you with the duel?" Horth grinned, as pleased as Dorn about the new arrival. He did not mention that Sinka had threatened to challenge him again if he paid as much attention to her baby as he continued to exhibit towards Dorn. Sinka considered it a Nessac failing that Horth took an interest in the infants he sired. Vrelish men were supposed to help raise the children of their mother's line, not their own. Over the years, Brant had taken to playing up the Vrelish threads in the braid he shared with Horth and Zrenal. Now, he was blatantly favoring Monatee's attire, and had gone so far as to weave green threads into his house braid at the top, as if he could predict his soul's future. Dorn badgered Brant to let him show off the new move he had just mastered. Brant obliged, donning a safety jacket and letting Dorn score hits against him. Horth understood one had to do that with a trainee, but he disapproved of the way Brant encouraged Dorn by feigning surprise when it was clear his brother had purposefully allowed a weak attack to get past him. He saw no point in giving Dorn a false sense of confidence. Brant wrapped up the interlude with a gift of candy purchased on the market round in the cosmopolitan city of Undergelion. "Do you think you could lend me your sire for a little while now?" he asked Dorn. "I've come to ask a favor." "Is it to do with the swearing at the court?" Dorn asked, losing interest in his present. "And if Horth is going, can I come? I want to meet my grandfather, Liege Nersal. Would you ask Mother for me, please, Horth?" Horth said, "No." Dorn looked crestfallen. Horth pulled him up into a companionable hug, because he understood his little son's frustrations. He would have liked nothing better than to take one of his children to court to show off to his parents, but he had no illusions about either of their mothers allowing him to borrow them. "Next time," Brant told Dorn. "But I don't want to wait for years and years," the child protested, threatening to pout. "You think people only go to court for swearings?" asked Brant. "Porash, child. There are loads of other reasons. Your mother might take you next time she goes to clinch a contract, attend a genotyping, or take in the Pandemish tournament." "Bet she won't," Dorn said sulkily. "She doesn't like court." "Well," Brant admitted, "there is that." One of Brillet's grandsons, who was 10 years older than Dorn, showed up to take him off Horth's hands. Horth gave Dorn a push in the direction of his maternal relative. With a last wistful look at Brant, Dorn went off obediently. "How is Eller?" asked Horth once they were alone. "Eller is Eller," Brant said impatiently. "Hard to shut up and happy to be everyone's baby for as long as possible." He laughed. "Sort of your opposite. You grew up so fast and never said much." Horth headed for the changing room. Brant followed, acting fidgety. Horth decided he was nervous about explaining the favor he had come to ask, and would let him tell lots of other things first. That was all right. Horth didn't mind waiting. "Mother's had a baby," said Brant. "It's a girl this time. They've named her Berylin. Eller spends as much time looking after her as Mother does. Uncle Sarn doesn't like it, so I do. Sarn doesn't like anything Eller does. The kid asks too many questions." "Good," said Horth. He undressed with his typical dispatch in all things practical and stepped into the hygiene chamber. Brant paced about the austere military locker room, working up his courage. In the hygiene chamber, Horth used the pull-down toilet, sealed it away, covered his eyes with a mask left hanging on a metal peg, and turned on the blast shower. The chamber spewed a fine mist of cleansing fluid, followed by an equally parsimonious rinse and blow-dry cycle. It was less gentle on one's skin, but it got the job done without wasting water. "I don't know how you cope without a bath now and then," remarked Branst, as Horth stepped out of the hygiene chamber, opened his locker, and began to put on clothes. "I don't know how you cope with the lack of entertainment either." His courtly brother went on in a familiar vein as Horth dressed in fleet fatigues. "I mean, all there is to do is swap stories about life and death struggles in space over glasses of station gin that taste like recycled urine. Apart from all the sex and duels, of course. What else is there?" "Engines," said Horth, by which he meant more than simply the phase splicers that let his ship draw power from the binding force of the space-time continuum. He meant everything to do with the operation of the station and its REL fighters. Working on engines was like a conversation in which the machinery revealed its function and he taught it how to do its job better. Branst understood nothing of such pleasures. He preferred to listen to the music of West Alcove courtesans, peruse old books, or debate the rules of rebirth and the whereabouts of Earth over drinks at a cafe on the plaza. Pastimes that would have bored Horth silly. Branst kept still for a whole minute, watching Horth seal up the jacket of his uniform with the 3 claw marks of the Nersalian dragon set high on the collar and House Brillet's emblem over his heart. "You're coming to court for the swearing, aren't you?" Branst asked. "As Brillet's retainer, of course, but you know you could stay with us." Horth reached for his sword. "Horth!" Branst caught his arm and met his brother's eyes. "Will you talk to me, please?" Branst let go, looking terribly anxious. "I really need someone I can talk to." Horth said, "Why?" Branst sat down astride a bench that was bolted to the floor. "I am scared," he admitted. "I'm scared that Dad won't swear to Delm again like Daimon wants. I am scared a rift is opening between them. I'm scared that Kim Stan won't accept Dad receiving Zrenal at Black Hearth now that he's married to a Nessak." "Zrenal is coming?" Horth asked. "Yes," sighed Branst. Horth answered with a grunt. "I'm scared of Zersarn," Branst continued. "He has so much influence over Mother. He has her all but clear dreaming the future." Horth frowned at that last remark. Clear dreamers recalled details from their past lives. To clear dream the future wasn't possible. After some reflection, he decided that was Brandt's point, but he still wasn't certain what to make of such a strange assertion. He wished Branst would put things simply. "And I'm scared for myself," Branst admitted. "Me and Tessitat." Horth put a hand on Brandt's shoulder. Branst covered it with his own. "I knew you'd understand," said Branst. Branst was 21 and Horth only 17, but Horth felt older than his brother. It made sense to him instinctively that his soul was the one with more experience, even if he could not access past memories like a clear dreamer. "There is a child," Branst said, looking straight into Horth's slate-gray eyes. "I have a freedom price." He swallowed thickly, his Adam's apple bobbing in his smooth throat. "By Tessitat." Horth absorbed the fact in complete stillness, aware there was trouble in it. "Tessitat had the child at her paternal grandmother's estate on Monitum," Branst warmed to his confession. "She still hasn't had him genotyped, and won't tell me in so many words that he's mine, but Horth?" He broke out in a smile that dispelled all the anxiety he had been projecting moments earlier. "She called him Brandstat. I don't need to see a genoprint to know he's mine. She did it for me, because she knows how much I want to be reborn Monetese in my next life. Oh, Horth, I have to tell someone. I have to say it out loud for more than the watching dead. Horth, I love her." Horth narrowed his eyes at Brand's choice of a Demish word for love. "I'm not saying a thing about marriage," exclaimed Branst. "Tessitat is not April Sarn, she's Green Vrelish. She would challenge me just for suggesting it and very likely win the duel. She's the second best nobleborn I have ever had the privilege of losing to in a duel." "Hara," Horth said factually. "First best." Branst fidgeted. "Sorry, I shouldn't have... well, yes." Horth was not offended. It pleased him that Branst remembered Hara. Brant's complacency at being beaten by any noble-born opponent was less pleasing. Branst was a Kim Stan. One day, he might owe his life to his swordsmanship. And Branst just told him something that might draw a challenge from Daimon himself. "I need your help, Horth," Branst told him. "You are coming to court this time, aren't you?" "I will come," Horth told his brother. "Yes!" Branst punched the air. He gave Horth a quick hug, then stood, gripping Horth by the shoulders and beaming at him with tears in the corners of his green eyes. "Thank you, little brother, thank you! I know what Mother meant about you when she called you a true heart. There's something about you that makes me feel even the most impossible situations might turn out all right if you were there. Something clean and honest, immune to sophistry. Horth, I want to be honest myself about everything." Horth waited, feeling apprehensive. Branst let go of him and wandered away, fingering every second or third nerve cloth panel on the lockers in the change room. Doing something pointless seemed to help him master his emotions. Horth waited. Finally, Branst stopped and turned around again. "I think Tess and I are Sher Stan," Branst said thickly. Horth lifted an eyebrow. Branst raised both palms defensively, as if to hold off unvoiced objections. "It isn't anti-Vrelish being Sher Stan. It isn't Nessak marriage. It's a soul bond. Of course, I know that being Sher Stan is rare and almost sacred. I don't mean to be pretentious, but I feel it." "Does Tessatat say you are Sher Stan?" Horth asked. "No," Branst admitted, crestfallen, then rallied. "But she has promised she won't take any casual lovers." "Shastan?" Horth asked, to be sure, because Branst often meant more than he said when he replaced a well-defined Vrelish-naming word with a fuzzier Demish description. Horth's relationship with Sinka was a Shastan one, casual and intermittent, with no particular commitment in it, but no shame either. That was not what the Demish meant by casual lover. Branst hunched his shoulders unhappily. "Horth, is it so wrong to love the woman who has had your baby?" "No," said Horth immediately. He loved Brillet, but he did not know how to adequately qualify the difference between that and the dangerous business of insisting Daimon's favorite hearthchild was his Sher Stan. Branst rewarded him with a sheepish grin. "See you at court," he said, and hurried away, leaving Horth to figure out how to make Brillet take him with her this time. His strategy in the end was simple. He told her he had to come, and drew his sword to show her how serious he was about it. "Gods," she said, throwing up her hands. "Come then and get killed if it's your rel. I can't protect you from Blackhearth embroilment by killing you myself." They dove like birds of prey through Gileon's thin atmosphere. First Brillet, then Horth, declaring themselves by their very need to work with narrow safety margins. They were Kimp Stan, no farther than a duel from the title of Liege Nursal. In some ways, it was truly that simple. In others, Horth was learning that dynamics surrounding the Nursalian right of challenge were as complex as those Horth had experienced on Sanhome. Brillet kept her finger on the pulse of discontent among the Kim Stan families. Many of them trusted her to decide on their behalf if Hangst went too far. Others she kept in check at sword point, aided by her reputation and a mob of willing allies. Their envoy ships raised sheets of fine dust on the runway between dry, reddish cliffs. 2 great tunnels leading down to Under Gileon rushed up. Brillet pulled ahead to enter the highborn chute before Horth. Lights hurried past as they slowed to emerge at a sedate pace on the floor of a great rectangular cavern. They taxied to a hangar with an attached hostel that was unimaginatively named Brillet Hostel in typically blunt Nursalian fashion. Moments later, Tash Brillet dropped out from under her shuttle, sword in hand, and strapped it on, now equipped to negotiate the political scene at the Empire's capital. She was a big woman, solid-boned and wide at the shoulders, with her braided hair pinned securely to her scalp, the crest of House Brillet on her breast and liege marks on her collar. Horth's build was leaner than Brillet's, and his facial features sharper, but she only looked more powerful. His strength was just more densely packaged. Brillet spoke briefly with the workers who ran to take charge of their ships, advising them of arrangements for the rest of her party who would be arriving soon after. Then she clapped Horth on the shoulder, saying, "This is where we part company, Mekenstma." Horth did not understand immediately. He had expected that she would come with him to Black Hearth, or at least decline Hank's hospitality in person. Brillet squeezed his shoulder. "Tell your sire I'll be glad to see him if he comes to me here," she told him. Horth did not relish being the bearer of bad news, but Brillet left him no choice. He passed through the Black Gate without a challenge and joined a stream of largely Demish foot traffic on the far side, parting clumps of slower-moving blonde men or ladies with their retinues. The moment Horth saw the matte black fabric of Black Pavilion, a wild reeling of possessiveness ambushed him. He was home. He recognized only one of the errants on guard. The rest were all Nessaks. He hesitated as he approached, but the errants gave way, allowing him to make his way down the spiral stairs. The family had been warned and found time to assemble. Father and mother stood side by side, mother with a boy child under one arm and a baby cradled in the other. Zersarn wore formal robes of a dark purple, embroidered with scenes depicting the great errors. Zrenal stood beside Sarn, dressed like a Nessak warrior. "Welcome home," Branst cried, embracing his brother, then turned him around towards their parents. "Look, mother, it's Horth, your true heart." A struggling, awkward silence followed. Beryl's eye brimmed, and she clutched her infant tighter. Hank's reaction was unreadable, but somber. Horth fixed his gaze on the wide-eyed boy, about Dorn's age, who stood in the shelter of Beryl's arm. "Eller," Horth said to the staring child, with a nod of recognition. The boy swallowed as if addressed by a daunting stranger. Beryl made up her mind, and with an apologetic glance at Zersarn, broke out in a smile of welcome. The change in her expression made her face beautiful. Her dress was a fitted shift, suitably practical for tending children, but elegant despite the burping blanket thrown over one shoulder. "Don't be frightened, Elder," Beryl told her small son. "This is Horth, your brother." She demonstrated her own acceptance of Horth by placing the baby in his arms. "Horth," she said, "this is your sister, Berylin." The baby felt so soft and fragile that Horth nearly panicked. Neither Brillet nor Sinka had allowed him to hold his own infants when they were this young. "This baby is my mother's," Horth reminded himself, and felt entitled. But baby Berylin began to wriggle and then cry because Horth was holding her too tightly. Eller declared loudly, "I like Zrenal better." "You owe Horth your life, Keen Echo," Beryl told Eller as she rescued her infant daughter, smiling at Horth's ineptitude. "He killed the Okalani creature who poisoned me to stop me from calling forth your soul into your body." Eller had clearly heard this kind of thing before and found it redundant. He continued to eye Horth with suspicion. "I don't think Eller is keen," Zrenal spoke up unexpectedly. "He's not rel enough." He cuffed the 4-year-old much as he might have done to Horth or Branst when they were little. Eller swatted back at him, tears in his eyes, and cried, "I am too rel, you big lump." "Got a mouth on him, though," Zrenal admitted as he turned his attention to Horth. "I hear you are an Abshah," Zrenal said to Horth, with a reserved expression. "And you have a freedom prize by Brillet, who is already Eller's age." Horth nodded. "And a baby girl, by Captain Sinka." There was a short, awkward silence in which Beryl busied herself with the children while Zrenal held Horth's stare. Finally, Zrenal took a deep breath and said, "I'll have 2 children myself, by the same woman." "I still wish you had brought your wife to court," Beryl told Zrenal with a forced air of simple domesticity. "I could so use another woman's company, and I long to see my grandchildren." The baby fussed, so Beryl bounced it in her arms while keeping her eyes fixed accusingly on Zrenal. "I appreciate your interest, Mother," Zrenal told her kindly, "but it would not have been right to bring my family with me into enemy territory. I have faith in sword law." But if something happened to me, how could I be sure they would get home safely? Hanks interrupted them by stepping forward. Where is Brillet? He demanded of his third son. I thought she would be coming with you. Horth felt a pain in his chest at this less than personal reception, but he rose to the challenge of matching father's business-first manner. He had already practiced the sentence. She said she will see you at the docks, if you desire. Hanks blinked. Then, his stern expression softened. That's quite a speech for you, Horth, he said. Then he added less kindly, Did she make you memorize it? Beryl came up beside her husband to lay a hand on the sleeve of his dress jacket. Their baby girl settled in her other arm. Hanks covered her hand with his in an automatic gesture of affection that sent conflicting feelings of warmth, fear, and envy skittering insanely over Horth's heart. Branst, Hanks ordered, show your brother to one of our guest rooms. As the gathering began to break up, Hanks added in a matter-of-fact tone, And Branst, we will expect to see both of you for breakfast. Branst talked about politics as he escorted Horth to a guest room on Family Hall, naming Kimpstan who might challenge at this swearing and gossiping about who supported them and who stood opposed. There had been at least 6 duels between members of the 2 camps, one of them fatal. Horth got the gist, but the details congealed into word lumps that only made him tired. He was glad when Branst left him alone. It was only then he realized what he was missing. He had not seen any servants at all. Once he'd unpacked his few things, he left his room and went into the back rooms, only to find most of them empty. But not all. The sound of quiet voices drew him to a common room where he knew the family servants gathered. Cook was there, so was Alice. He recognized another half-dozen survivors of Mother's purges as well. My, said Cook, and froze as if she wasn't sure if he was someone familiar or frightening. Master Horth, isn't it? Alice smiled at him with faltering lips, wringing her hands in her apron. Horth wasn't sure how to let them know how good it was to see them until he noticed the tray of melon slices sitting on a side table beside Cook's armchair. He stepped over, took a slice, and waited for Cook to remember. The middle-aged woman's eyes filled with tears, inexplicably, but much to Horth's delight, she slapped his hand and said, You know you mustn't eat those or you'll get a stomach ache. He was even more surprised when Alice flung herself at him, sobbing. After that, the rest closed around him, emboldened to take small liberties that revived old associations. And for the first time, Horth felt himself wholly welcome, without reserve. Horth found it hard to eat breakfast the next morning. Eller wolfed down his food and left as fast as he could. Hanks asked a few polite questions. Zrenel ate in silence. Branst never showed up. When she wasn't waiting on the rest of them, Mother picked at her food, casting worried looks in Horth's direction and lowering her eyes whenever Zersarn addressed her. Horth stole glances at Zrenel, trying to understand him as he was now. He wanted to know what Father thought about Eagle Nest. He wanted Mother to be pleased that he had 2 children. It was not until Zersarn finished his meal and excused himself that the family relaxed enough for conversation. It is good to see you looking so well, Beryl told Horth. Baby Berylin was nodding in her lap, and Horth wished again that he had his own baby to show off, preferably with someone else in tow to manage the difficult business of holding her and things of that sort. Don't you think Horth looks well, Zrenel? Beryl tried to initiate some contact between her grown sons. Zrenel looked up from his nearly empty plate of Tarkian farm eggs, beef steak, and fried vegetable mash with an expression as cold as a dead planet. The silence stretched out. At last, to please his mother, Zrenel said, How is the weather in Killing Reach these days, Horth? Bad, said Horth. Weather, among pilots, meant reality-skimming conditions and not atmospheric disturbances. Zrenel wiped his mouth with his napkin. All of it is inspired by Rishans 200 years ago, said Zrenel. That's the best you can expect from soulless commoners. How is San home? Horth asked in return. Better than I ever dreamed, said Zrenal. Horth nodded. Zrenal made his excuses, got up, and left. Only Horth and his parents remained seated. This was exactly what Beryl had been waiting for. With both Ser Sarn and Zrenal gone, she launched into stories about Horth's new siblings, even drawing stories out of Hanks concerning Eller as a toddler. Apparently, Eller had been a terror ever since he learned to talk. He seems a little shy now, Beryl added, but I think it's just an awkward phase. He has those now and then. I wish I could speak with my mother to ask her if Keen went through phases like this. At the mention of Keen's name, Hank's expression clouded. Perhaps you can give me a few minutes alone with Horth? He asked. Yes, of course, Mother said immediately, and bustled out, humming to the baby in her arms. She is different, observed Horth. It's that priest, said Hangst, and drew a deep breath that expanded his broad chest and straightened his back. Tell me something about Dorn, he invited, and your new daughter. Horth honored the request as best he could, grateful for his father's interest. Hangst asked him about his work in Brillet's fleet, and gave every sign of being proud of him for becoming an Avshah. He also approved of Horth's goal of becoming a battle wheel captain, although he raised the unwelcome difficulty of Horth's communication problems and suggested he might do better in an engineering career. But I'm glad you found Brillet in Killing Reach, Hangst concluded, and I want you to know I understand why you turned against Zrenal. I've said as much to Zrenal. He had no right to squander our family's honor. Daimon's protege, Vret Lavrel, brought the whole thing before Fountain Court and won an honor judgment against the Nessaks. Although there's little can be done to make Arn face her when he answers to the Kisk, and not the Ava. The point is, Horth, that even Zrenal knew it was wrong. Hangst frowned. Although you wouldn't think so, to talk to him now. Hangst dropped his napkin on his plate, done with breakfast. You were not remembered kindly back on San home, he told Horth. Arn failed to take Eagle Nest because of you, and neither Rad nor Hill survived the shake-up. Horth was sorry to have confirmation about Hill. He nearly asked about Kale, then thought better of it. His memories of Kale were so thickly overlaid with sexual urgency that he didn't know exactly what he felt about her as a person. He suspected she probably felt much the same. Unexpectedly, Horth's father laughed. What really impressed me, said Hangst, is that you have the energy to spare for Captain Cinca, now that you were serving in my place as Brillet's McCanst. Horth accepted the compliment with a smile. Is Brance living at home? He asked. Oh, yes, Hank said, and heaved a long-suffering sigh. He quarreled with Zrenal before you showed up this morning and bolted, that's all. As usual. He generally goes next door to Green Hearth when he's in such a mood. For a moment, Hangst weighed what he was about to ask, then decided. Do you know where he gets to when he goes off-planet altogether, for months? Yes, said Horth, remembering Tessatat's child. Hangst frowned. I thought as much. He leaned forward on an elbow. Horth, I love Brance, but he's trouble. He can't fight well enough to defend his beliefs, and he won't set them aside either. He may try to draw you into his problem, as his champion. You understand the risks involved? Horth nodded. Hank sat back. Akrel then, son. A brief silence ensued, broken by Hank's hearty chuckle. You two always did like each other, hard as it is sometimes to understand. He betrayed a trace of hope and excitement, steeped in the usual tensions that troubled his peace of mind when Fountain Court politics were involved. I have an idea or two myself, concerning Brant's infatuation with Daimon's hearthchild Tessatat. I meant to have it out with Daimon this afternoon, at the reception on the Octagon for Brillet. He paused. Your liege will be attending the reception, won't she? You must ask her, said Horth. Hangst frowned. All right, you go fetch your brother back in good time and I will swallow my pride enough to visit Brillet on the docks, and drag her up here personally if I must. Yes, sire, said Horth, but found the Vrelish approach to acknowledging their relationship too cold and odd. He was entitled to call Hengst Le Liege, the short form of liege of my liege, but that felt equally stilted. Father, Horth fixed the problem. Hank smiled. He got out of his seat, gestured to Horth to get up, and gave him a hard hug. Welcome back to Gileon, said Hengst. And to Fountain Court. You did the right thing at Eagle Nest. You always do. More gravely, Hengst added. One way or the other, things will have to change at this reception. And I am not sorry to know Brance will have some backup if they go wrong. Hengst broke off and showed his smile again, one hand on Horth's shoulder. But I don't know what I'm so worried about. I have a reasonable case to put to Daimon, and reason is the one thing he can be counted on to respond to. Hank sighed. Brillet may be another matter. In parting, he added, Don't be late getting back with Branst. Once they had parted, Horth went out onto Fountain Court and clockwise one establishment to Green Hearth. The herald told him Tessitat had gone to West Alcove to take in the act of a new sword dancer named Vaughn, whom everyone was talking about. Horth decided he would find Brance there as well. High Lord. Horth introduced himself at the door of Den Eva's, on the far side of Under Gileon. He was supposed to say something that allowed inferiors to deduce his birth rank from his pronouns, but he couldn't think of anything appropriate, so he simply declared what he was. The woman who greeted him accepted his solution with professional aplomb. How can we serve you today, Your Grace? She asked. Brance Nersal, Horth said, and Tessitat Monitum. They are here, said the woman, watching the entertainment. She stepped aside to let Horth pass. The patrons' round was much as Horth remembered it, with novices in white togas waiting on Sevelites in a wide band surrounding a central sunken stage. A pair of dancers held the room's attention. The woman was a sleek blonde with a stately figure. Her partner was a remarkably flawless youth with black hair and gray eyes, who had to be Vaughn. Horth watched just long enough to figure out what made the young man's movements interesting, and decided it was the way Vaughn's fluid grace masked the strength behind them, making them look misleadingly effortless and casual. The room appeared to be enthralled, but Horth found something irritatingly clever about the way Vaughn's choreographed moves mocked the violence of a real duel. The props the courtesans used were not real swords either, only showy replicas. After dismissing Vaughn's style as vaguely annoying, Horth found himself entranced by the female dancer, whose athletic body was sheathed in a skin-tight costume of blue and silver. He remembered his mission only when Vaughn's body interrupted his view of her. Brance and Tessitat were at a table near the dance floor. Horth noted a couple of red Vrelish nobleborns from Spiral Hall nearby. Most of the other tables were filled with small parties of Demish men. The last one was occupied by a group of Nersalian Relshah, 2 male and 2 female. Satisfied he had a rough grasp of his surrounding company, Horth headed directly for Branst. You dragged me here to watch him dance? He's not even a grown-up, Branst was saying to Tessitat, with a contemptuous gesture in Vaughn's direction. That's not what his customers tell me, Tess said with a smirk. They say he's even better off the dance floor. You haven't... Branst began and stopped himself. What if I had? She challenged. It would be good for my reputation and yours. We're keeping to ourselves too much. Yes, but a dancer? Branst exclaimed in disgust. A child dancer? 13, in fact, said Tessitat, choosing that moment to lift her head and say, Hello, Horth. Horth! Branst gave a start that caught the attention of their Nersalian neighbors. He followed up by pushing a chair out for Horth. Sit down. Some wine for my brother, Branst ordered a toga-clad child. Horth's wine came in a glass horn with a matching metal base for putting it down on the small round table. The audience let out a collective ooh at something Vaughn was doing. Will you look at that? Enthused Tessitat. Big deal, Branst grumbled. She scowled at him. Don't be Demish. I'm not Demish. But you are jealous. You're trying to make me crazy, aren't you? he accused her. "Here comes the finale," said Tess, giving Vaughn her full attention. Branst was equally adamant about not watching. "How did you make out at breakfast?" he asked Horth instead. Horth shrugged. He had no words to explain what had passed between him and his father. "Sorry I wasn't there," said Branst. "Zrenel was saying stupid things about the household commoners, trying to get Dad to evict the few we have left. Then he started telling Dad he shouldn't swear to Delm just to please Daimon, as if Daimon actually likes Delm himself. It's got nothing to do with powerful feelings. Daimon is thinking of the Empire. He'd be just as happy as Dad if there was a better choice available for Ava." "There is Evrel," said Tess, without taking her eyes off the young dancer wrapping up his routine on the dance floor. Branst made a rude noise. "Great choice that is. Evrel, the banished pervert. Where's their kid, the lost Prince Amel, when he could really come in handy? You'd think the Demish could scare up just one more pureblood somewhere, given all the fuss they make about them." Horth glanced over at the nearest Demish tables to see if the occupants had taken offense at Brandt's opinion, but the blonde men were too absorbed in the show, or the courtesans sitting with them, to pay much attention. The dance routine concluded in a final pose, and the audience exploded in a roar of foot-stomping and whistles. As the commotion died down, the Nursali and Rel Shah sauntered over with their female Avshah in the lead and 2 men flanking her. Their 4th member went to convey her personal congratulations to Vaughn, with the air of someone making arrangements for a private encore. "You are Branst Nursal of Black Hearth, aren't you?" the Avshah greeted Branst in peerage. "I might be," Branst answered in a surly fashion. "Might be?" The Avshah pulled out a chair beside Branst and sat down. "You courtly types are never sure of anything." "Are you here for the swearing?" Tessitat asked one of the male Rel Shah as he smiled at her. "We're not looking for company," Branst flared. The woman fixed him with a haughty look, and then turned to Horth. "And you are Horth, the one who killed the Okalani errant." Branst stood up, pushing his chair back. "There was nothing Okalani about Hara," he told her fiercely, getting even more agitated. "Really?" The Avshah rose to face him. "Then why did your full brother here have to kill her?" She emphasized full brother in a way that underscored how unusual that was in Vrelish families. "It's none of your business," Branst snapped at her. "Kimpstan are always in each other's business, Branst Nursal," she said, her gray eyes narrowing. "For example, the word is that you've gone the way of your father and full brother Zrenel when it comes to women, with the sole difference being that you prefer the green Vrelish to Nessax." She jerked her head in Tessitat's direction. Branst went for her. Horth stopped him. It was Tessitat who voiced a challenge. "If you're accusing me of man-hoarding," she cried, and paused to clear her weapon. "I will answer. That is, of course, if you will do me the service of overlooking the disparity in our challenge classes." "Tess, no!" Branst gasped. "She's Kimpstan." "So are you," Tessitat said between clenched teeth. "And I can take you." "I will answer," said Horth, and jumped down lightly on the empty stage floor. People looked. He cleared his sword and waited. The Avshah shrugged and joined him on the stage floor with her sword drawn. "I was not really out to start a quarrel," she said. "First blood?" Horth suggested. She nodded her agreement. By now they had the whole room's attention, including that of the 2 men under the Avshah's command who usurped the empty chairs at Tessitat's table and settled down to watch in a companionable manner. "Horth has no business fighting my quarrels," Tessitat fumed when she had sheathed her sword and sat down again beside Branst. "Yes, he does," said Branst. "He's highborn like her. And I sort of asked him here for the swearing to do just that." "What?" exclaimed Tessitat. Horth and the Nursalian woman squared off and signaled one another they were ready to start. She lunged immediately, going for a quick jab in the arm that might have caught a novice napping. Horth parried and retaliated. They enjoyed a furious exchange of free-form ingenuity, full of counter-parries and disengages, which lasted for a full 15 seconds. Neither one targeted the other's head or torso. A touch, scored on Horth's arm, cut his shirt and drew blood. "Ha!" cried the Avshah. Brance looked disappointed. Horth stepped back. "Again?" he invited. "Think I got lucky, do you?" his opponent mocked him. "All right." She attacked with confidence and lost twice in quick succession. The first time, Horth nicked her thigh, and the second, he touched her forearm. They called it a draw at that point. Both contestants rejoined the table, dabbing wounds to staunch the bleeding. No one clapped, but a fresh round of drinks was delivered, courtesy of some of the admiring Demish patrons. Horth's cut was too trivial to bother with, but one of the Rail Shah produced a first aid tool called the seamer, and used it to seal the Avshah's worst cut as she kept her teeth gritted. A courtesan at the neighboring table made a face at the smell of seared flesh as the seamer pressed the edges of the wound together and closed them with a hiss of vaporized blood. When the ministrations were taken care of, the Avshah toasted Horth with her wine horn, her criticisms of Brance and Tess apparently forgotten. "I'm Kiga Tark," she told them, and went on to introduce the two Rail Shah in her fighter hand, as well as the second woman who had gone down a spoke hall with a dancer named Vaughn. The Tarkians belonged to a space-based industrial house with few planetary holdings of any sort. They were here for the swearing, and to find out if trading with Nessax might be worth the risk of trusting them. Brance grew expansive as the drinks flowed, eager to undermine Kiga's hopeful avarice with stories of how Nessax treated non-Eternals, all the while vigorously defending his father's essential relishness despite the Nessax influence at Black Hearth. Things did not get tense until Kiga objected, rather strongly, to Hengst being married. The reference to his mother made Brance flush. "That's relish too," he insisted. "Father is honoring the terms of his duel with Keen Nessac, and it isn't as if we're not honoring old ties as a family. With Liege Brillet, for example." He gave Horth a friendly shove. Kiga caught Brance's arm as he drew it back. "And what about you?" she asked, looking into his eyes with the intensity of a mining laser. "Do you keep up old ties with Kim Stan, Brance Nersal?" "He's with me," Tess said in a flinty tone. "Today," she added. "Don't be greedy, Greenhearth," Kiga told her. "Besides, I've got mankin to share with you. 2 if you're up to it." Tessitat inspected Kiga's male companions with a calculating eye, but one with less genuine sexual interest than she had shown for young Vaughn earlier. Brance's color began to rise the way it did before he said things that he shouldn't. Tessitat threw the first punch. She delivered it right across the table smack into Kiga's face, following up with a dive into her highborn rival. The two women fell sideways, their sheathed swords interfering with their movement. Still struggling, they bumped loudly down the long, shallow steps to the stage floor, limbs locked together in a heaving tangle. One of Kiga's male companions was laid out by Horth as soon as he stood up. Brance was having trouble with his man. Horth pulled them apart. He ducked the Railshaw's punch, caught his arm, and swung him onto their table, sending the last wine horn to join the rest in pieces on the floor. The first man was on his feet again by now, fighting with Brance, who was getting in a punch for each one that he took, although Horth would have bet on the Tarkian in the long run. "Enough!" Kiga's voice bellowed from the dance floor. She followed up with a fruity tenor belly laugh that made the men stop to figure out what was going on, because on the face of it, Kiga had nothing to laugh about. She was lying on her back, warding off Tessitat's fists with bruised forearms. With a heave, Kiga cast her noble-born rival off and surged up to her feet, grinning. "Fine, have him," she said with a hearty clap on Tessitat's back as she levered herself up beside Kiga. "He's yours, and I will never again doubt that Monatee's women are as relish as they come." She paused to spit blood, and added in a more serious tone, "Just remember to pass him around when you're done." Horth went down to Kiga on the dance floor, moved by an instinct he did not try to understand. He wasn't even sure what he meant to do until a smile spread across her wide, sensuous mouth. Then he knew. He had seen Vrelish patch up quarrels this way before. Certain of his reception, He slid an arm about her back and went off with her to a guest room amid hoots and thigh-slapping sounds of approval from the two men he and Brance had just been fighting. Keega's female companion emerged from her own adventure with Vaughn, took in the mayhem around the table, and asked, "Did I miss something important?" "No," Tessitat said grumpily, and swatted Brance for grinning at her. "Nothing at all." Horth woke up beside Keega 40 minutes later, acutely aware that he was going to be late for the reception. He slapped Keega's thigh. "Rumph," she said, and sat up rubbing her bruised jaw. Then she grinned at him. "You always pass out at the end?" "Reception," Horth reminded her as he yanked his shirt on, not answering the question. Tessitat and Brance had already gone on ahead, but he found someone waiting for him with the car. "Cessna Sal," she introduced herself. "Your brother Brance said you might need a lift home. I said I'd take you in exchange for an invitation to the reception. I hear there may be swords drawn. What do you say, Avshar?" Horth nodded and opened the door on the driver's side. Cessna Sal hesitated a moment before she gave in and slid over. "Real relish you are," she remarked as she helped him stow his sword in a rack across the back. "A bad passenger." Horth pulled out and merged with the fast-moving traffic on the Ava's way, hoping to minimize his lateness. "They call you the Silent One," Cess continued, leaning counter to a swerve as Horth whipped around a slower vehicle. "Some even say Reject, a flawed cast." Horth hit a clear patch and gave the car full power, with respectable results, but since half the traffic in both directions cruised at top speed, it wasn't very satisfying. Cess braced a hand on an overhead bar as she kept up the one-sided conversation. "I admit I enjoy witnessing a good duel," she said. "I've taken part in my share as well, of course, and won more than I lost, too. It was a duel that grounded me. A fight with the Demish lout who riled me up with his bragging about how it was always a Demish champion who won the tournaments on Gillian. I told him that tournaments didn't count because Relish Highborn seldom enter." Horth bumped straight over a pile of refuse that had fallen off a vehicle ahead of him. "Unfortunately," said Cess, "I lost. He got me in the knee, and it hasn't worked right since." She sighed. "What I wouldn't give to be regenerative. But I tell you, it is still a source of great frustration to me that our highborns won't put those Demish in their place at tournaments." They skidded to avoid a car that appeared unexpectedly from the dim recesses of an alley between two wayside establishments. Horth's slide sent them into a heap of old crates set up as a barrier on the other side of the road. They struck at an angle, shoving two crates full of something heavy for several meters before Horth regained control. He turned back into the erratic stream of traffic on the Ava's way, feeling a little rattled by his last mishap. "Busy today?" Cess remarked. Moments of clear driving later, she said, "It was the talk of the garage, that's my business, I run a garage, when you took down the captain of the Black Hearth Guard." Horth spared her a quick glance. "Not all of it was good talk," she admitted. "We were pretty proud of Hara. There was a noble-born who could take any highborn on their own terms. Except you, apparently. I liked you a lot better after Eagle Nest, though," she added cheerily, and put a hand on Horth's thigh. The resulting wiggle in the car's trajectory convinced Cess to leave self-expression to words after they managed to survive. They paid a premium for a safe place to park, close to the Citadel. Horth waited impatiently. When they reached the stairs, he took them at a run. Cess fell behind at once. "Wait!" she hollered at him. "They won't let me through the palace shell without you!" Horth hesitated, wondering what sort of deal he'd made with Brance, and whether he was honor-bound to bring her along. Irritably, he reversed his steps to reach her, and swept her up in his arms, sword and all, to carry her the rest of the way. She didn't seem to mind after her initial astonishment. By the time he put her down at the top, she had caught her breath. "I've never been to a Fountain Court reception before," she confided with glee as they arrived at Black Pavilion. Horth pounded down the spiral stairs to find the main reception room empty except for a few errands and one of Mother's retainers. "Everyone is down on the octagon," said the Nessac retainer, with a glance askance at Cess as she came down the stairs. Is there a duel? Cess asked excitedly. The Nessac retainer ignored her. Delm's paladins are trespassing on Golden Wedge, he told Horth. It has everyone's attention. Both Liege Monitum and your father have repeatedly upheld the rights of the Golden Demish against Delm's claims. Politics, Horth decided, with an echo of his mother's resentment for Daimon's ability to embroil Hangst in such affairs. Come on, said Cess. Let's go witness. This time, it was Horth who followed her down the next coil of stairs onto Black Wedge. They encountered more errants on honor guard at the bottom, and beyond them a wall of backs, in something like a witnessing circle, facing out across the octagon towards the Golden Wedge. It's that Demish nonsense about souls of light, the version of a Zerpol, Cess remarked, at Horth's elbow. Delm claims he is one. She made a rude noise. So his paladins presume the right to trespass on Golden Wedge, strutting and posing. Horth could see 3 paladins through the crowd. They wore spotless white clothes with golden decorations at the waist and cuffs, their bright yellow hair braided in elaborate patterns. They wielded jewel-hilted swords in a stylized display that reminded Horth of Vaughn, the sword dancer. They wouldn't be doing that if Prince Deander were here to defend Golden Hearth on behalf of his emperor, Cess muttered. Not that I normally make a study of Demish champions, but Prince Deander has proved himself in high-stake duels. He would make short work of those puppies. I would not discount the skill of paladins too lightly, a familiar voice intruded from behind them. Horth turned to face Daimon. Cessnersel lost the power of speech upon discovering herself addressed by the Liege of Monitum. She began an Ursalian salute, and broke off with a fumbling gesture as she realized it was not the right one. Daimon clearly meant something to her. The impression that he made was profound enough to distract her from saluting her own liege when Hangst joined them. I wager Cess is right about them being puppies, said Hangst, holding the stem of his wine horn too tightly as he glared at the paladins flaunting their trespass. They are trying to provoke us, Daimon told Hangst firmly. Succeeding, actually, Hangst answered, glaring not at the paladins but past them to the place where Delm himself sat watching the scene, ensconced in the midst of admiring princesses and 24 armed Demish princes. It isn't worth it, Hangst, Daimon warned. Paladins may look like fools, but they train hard, and if you take down one, the next will challenge. They are each officially the other's heir. Who knows how the Silver Demish princes will react, for that matter? And don't think I'll be fool enough to help you. All we need before this swearing is a melee on the challenge floor to worsen the split between Vrelish and Demish sympathies. Hank said nothing. He just continued to glare in Delm's direction. Excuse me, Cess said, looking excited and flustered. This is out of line entirely, I realize, but I've always admired your record in the arena, Liege Monitum, when you were younger, of course, before the heir problem. I've heard you don't get out much when you were at court, and, well, at the risk of being far too blunt, if you're looking for a local McCanst, I mean an Ursalian, seeing as there's a bond of friendship between you and my liege. She stopped with a gulp, belatedly grasping by Daimon's nonplussed look just how far out on a limb she had placed herself. Well, she finished, and slapped on a wide grin. I'd be honored. Hangst looked at Cess, then Daimon, and barked a curt laugh with no humor in it. Ha! Good idea, he cried, and clasped Daimon by the arm. We must talk now, Borello. Even Daimon knew when Hangst would brook no resistance. If we must, he said, reluctantly. Go find Branst and Tessitat and bring them with you to my study, Hangst told Horth. As Horth departed on his errand, he heard Daimon say to Cess, We'll talk later. Really? She asked, astonished. And then, with an explosion of pleasure at her good luck, The gods ignore me! It was easy to find Tessitat and Branst. They were in the front line of the witness circle watching the paladins. Tessitat was busy telling Branst the names of all the opponents that each of the paladins had killed, Probably as a cautionary measure. Father wants you, Horth told his brother. And you, he added to Tessitat, bungling the shift in pronoun which made her blink. He was supposed to use Polcase when down speaking an inferior. Instead, he had peer-spoken both of them. Horth was fleetingly embarrassed, but as soon as Tessitat figured out what he meant, she forgot about the grammar fumble. She and Brance exchanged stares, and a bolt of cold shock passed between them. Horth touched his brother's arm to reassure him that he would be coming also. It troubled him to see Brance look frightened. Hanks and Daimon were waiting for them in Hank's study, off Family Hall. Hanks looked as solid as a hull steel pillar. Daimon was pacing. Both of them were still armed. Brance and Tessitat sat down on a firm couch upholstered in black leather. Horth took up a standing position near Brance. "All right, they're here," Daimon snapped, halting suddenly. "Now what?" "You and I fought together in the Nessac War," Hanks told his friend soberly. "We have stood together ever since for the Vrelish cause. But today we must decide to merge," Hanks meshed his hands, "or go our own ways." He pulled them apart again. "If this is about me taking a Cessner Sal as my mechanist," Daimon said, very fast, "of course I will accept." "More," said Hanks. He walked over to his stand before Tessitat. "You have a child," he told her bluntly. "I think he is my grandson." Hanks lay a palm over the crossed hook at the top of the house braid embroidered on his shirt. "If he is highborn, that makes him Kimstan. Even if he is only nobleborn, it makes him bloodkin of a lesser sort." Daimon looked stunned, but whether by the fact of the child's existence or Hank's awareness of it, Horth could not be sure. Daimon looked at his niece. Tessitat quailed before the stare of her liege uncle in a way that Horth had never seen her shrink from anything before. "I do not accuse your niece of soul-stealing," Hanks assured Daimon with energy. "The baby is obviously a love child, an accident of affection, for which my hearth-child is as much to blame as yours. It is done. I say embrace it. Let the blood of black and green Vrelish mingle to create one house of courtly Vrelish that is strong enough to stand against Demish corruption. Do not turn away from me." Hanks interrupted himself to lay hands on Daimon's shoulders. Daimon's chiseled nostrils flared angrily at Hank's touch, but he suffered himself to be held while Hanks lectured. "You need the highborn blood," Hanks insisted. "What do you have left of it on Monitum? 1 or 2 indifferent swordsmen and some useless scholars. You hope to woo the Vrelish via Vretla. But what good will red Vrelish ties do you against a Demish Ava? They will never fight unless they are invaded. If a Vrelish power is going to stand against Delm, it must be us." "Are you, Hengst?" Daimon demanded hotly, jerking free. "Vrelish? Are you Vrelish?" "What?" Hanks was taken aback and offended. Even Horth felt the urge to reach for his sword. Brance sat straighter. "Are you still Vrelish?" Daimon snapped, his own temper clearly lost. "Or turning Nessac?" "Uncle!" cried Tessitat, leaping up. "No!" But the two lieges were fixed on each other, indifferent to the distress of their loved ones. "I do have Nessac blood," Hank said in cold anger. "If you fear it, you should know that I fear the Laurel and yours." He paused, his throat locking, and relaxed the muscles with an effort. "Prove to me that you honor sword law, Daimon. Declare the child Brance's. Let there be more. Gods, man! Is it better to let Monetese highborns die out this generation than to risk a title challenge in the next one? You are down to a handful of Monetese highborns, and you will not even sire your own heirs on Monetese nobleborns." "You know I cannot," Daimon exploded bitterly. "I am infertile." "So you claim," Hanks answered with equal ferocity, and struggled to speak levelly as he continued. "But I have wondered lately why it is you consort with courtesans instead of fertile women. Surely if you were slow to breed, the more the better. Or are you like Delm, so afraid of challenge right entanglements that you deny life to your waiting dead to protect property?" Something in Daimon's bleak expression made Hangst relent with a forced sigh of pent-up frustration. Even if you are infertile, he concluded, it need not matter. You have kin. So do it. Tessitat and Brance will only be the first of many. Join with me, Daimon, through the mingling of souls. Join me like a true Vrelish ally. You are asking Monitum to accept becoming Nersalian, Daimon said miserably. How can I condone that, Borello? Tell me, instead, that you will waive challenge rights entirely and gift us your half-Nersalian children free and clear. Tell me that you will start with Tessitat's child, and I will order a genotyping and gladly declare Brance the sire if it is true. But I do not know that it is true. As I stand here, I swear that much to you. Yes, it could be Brance's child, or it might not. We thought it better simply not to find out. Brance looked sharply at Tessitat. She squeezed his hand in silent reassurance. The child's soul is as likely to be Nersalian as Monatee's, Hank said stonily. I cannot refuse to name him Kimp Stan. And you say that I am stubborn, Daimon cried. Hangst inhaled, once, nostrils flaring. Then he headed for the door with decision. Hangst? Daimon spun around, his anger boiling away in panic. No! Tessitat got in the way of her liege uncle as he made to follow. If he's going to kill himself challenging paladins, she said intensely, you swore you would stay out of it. Horth dodged around them, leaving Brance behind. He sprinted down the throat to the reception hall and took the spiral stairs 2 at a time. By the time he reached the octagon, his father was already crossing the challenge floor towards Golden Wedge with his sword drawn. The leader of the paladins came out to meet him. Horth halted at the edge of Black Wedge beside Zrenal. They met each other's eyes, and all at once, their quarrel over Eagle Nest seemed very far away and unimportant. If Hangst was attacked dishonorably, they would join him and make it a melee. Horth had no doubt the rest of the Nessags and Nersalians around them would do likewise if the Demish princes on Silver Wedge got active. Beside them, Beryl stood clutching Zersarn's arm, her face a mask of terror. Zersarn himself looked grimly satisfied. Across the octagon from Black Wedge, Demish princes on Silver Wedge fingered their swords, looking apprehensive or excited, each according to his inclinations. The women were hustled up the stairs. Liege Nassau, intoned the senior paladin, and flashed a pearly smile. I believe you are trespassing on Golden Wedge, Hanks told him, shifting his feet to get ready. Get off now, or die. The paladin raised one pale, manicured eyebrow. Why should you defend De Morn claims? And what do you know of them? The paladin's large, attractive features shaped themselves into a mocking leer. Or have you taken it into your head to give your oath to Deander, this swearing? No, Hanks said. Only to instruct you in good courtly manners. Will you fight? The paladin glanced back at his 2 companions, and over at the Demish watching them from Silver Wedge. He looked at the highborns on Black Wedge as well. Then he shrugged and said, Very well. Horth spotted Brillet farther down on the front line of spectators. She watched the same way he and Zrenal did, silent and intent. Hangst and the paladin edged back and forth, calculating, gauging each other's defenses with a few quick moves, waiting for an opening. Horth feared it was Hangst whose patience was in the worse repair. Daimon, Tessitat, and Brance came down the Black Hearth stairs and froze there. Suddenly, Hangst attacked. The first paladin staggered while parrying the repeated blows. The crowd drew a collective breath. Gods, Daimon murmured softly. Then, one of the attacks turned into a feint and a disengage, and the paladin was toppling as Hangst yanked his sword clear from the man's chest. Stillness reigned for a long moment. Then, the next paladin came forward jerkily, driven by shock and anger. This one went down even faster, in his first close with Hangst. Horth had expected no less. The man had been far too emotional. The crowd seemed to be more surprised as it drew a collective breath. The third paladin was unnerved. The princes on Silver Wedge swayed and muttered among themselves. Nersalians and Nessacs tensed. Whether or not the third paladin meant to drop his sword was a moot point. It might simply have been done out of fear, but he dropped it, and he fled. A few Nersalians began to laugh. The Demish raised their voices in a thunderous yell of affirmation for acceptance of the verdict under sword law. Okal Rel! On the other side of the floor, Daimon led the answering cheer. Okal Rel! The risk of a melee died away with the shouting, as everyone lapsed into silence, the two bodies lying where they fell, their clean white clothing leaking red. Hanks gave his blade a contemptuous shake, as if the blood of these enemies sullied it. Then he stalked off the challenge floor and back to Black Wedge, drawing Nersalians and Nessacs after him without a word. Brillet caught up with Horth as he made to follow his father. We leave, she told him urgently. At once. Daimon waited in Azir Lounge for Hanks to take leave of him. Demish callers came, but he lacked the courage to deal with them. Vretla stayed away, and he was glad of it. He did not have the patience to explain what had happened to Vretla yet. As the hours went by, and Cyrillus informed him Nersalian highborns were leaving court en masse, Daimon began to fear Hanks would leave without a final understanding reached between them. He even began to dread the unthinkable, that Hanks had somehow found out about his personal affliction. All Daimon had said about not daring to overlap challenge rights with the Kimstan was true, but he had other, personal reasons for claiming to be infertile. Reasons that were reinforced by how he felt about Hanks himself. Reasons that would threaten any children he had, if his secret were ever known, and deal a fatal blow to Monitum. Time and again, he convinced himself it was impossible for anyone to guess what he felt as long as he did nothing to act on it, only to have his fears undermine his conviction, so he had to do it all over again. It was 8 hours after the bloodletting on the Octagon when his herald finally told him someone from Black Hearth wished to see him. Daimon had risen to receive Hanks, but sat down again as if struck in the chest when Branst walked into Azir Lounge. Your father is gone? Daimon asked, when he could draw air to speak. Branst mustered courage with an effort and said shakily, He's leaving the servants and the skeleton roster of errants. He's asked me to check in occasionally. He had hoped you would help. With keeping Blackhearth open to visiting Kimstan. Yes, of course, Daimon said automatically. An awkward silence lingered. I won't be able to be here a lot, Branst pushed on. Dad says the Demish would pressure me to swear in his place if I did. Dad said you could, contact me via... Daimon smiled as Branst began to look embarrassed, thinking about Hank's sense of humor. Cess Nersal, he said quietly. Branst nodded. Fine, Daimon said. It was something, even if it wasn't all he'd hoped for in the way of a sustained connection. He was afraid to ask the next question, but he knew he had to. Where has Hanks gone? As he asked it, Daimon thought, not Sanhome. And to his relief, Branst answered, to Tark, for the time being.